Jim Rubens took 10 minutes to talk to me for this week's podcast, but I didn't have time to fit him in, and since he was the only national level candidate, here's his interview all by itself. Okay, so you call yourself a serial entrepreneur, and in the past 20 years you've been involved in just about every facet of New Hampshire politics. You are currently waging a primary challenge to the sitting Republican U.S. Senator Kelly Ayotte, and you just had a debate. So how did that go?
Well, the debate really pointed out the differences between me and Senator Ayotte. She's a promise breaker. I'm a promise keeper. She promised to oppose amnesty and to secure the borders, and she'd get down to Washington and voted for the Gang of Eight open borders. Amnesty drive down American wages bill. She promised to be a fiscal conservative and get down to Washington again and voted for trillions of dollars of debt and Obama and the Democrats' budget. Bipartisan capitulation. She promised to be a constitutional conservative and voted with Chuck Schumer to give Loretta Lynch the power to negate due process and to weaken our gun rights. And she promised to be pro-life, and she voted for Planned Parenthood funding. And not only that, during the debate, she attempted to obfuscate, and actually I'll use the word, she lied about her voting record. All of this is easy to fact check.
Let's talk about voters. You've obviously talked to a lot of voters. What are you hearing from them about the priorities that they would like to see from their U.S. Senator?
You know, I'm going to add something here. What I would like to do, I would like to be a Republican in the U.S. Senate who votes like a Republican, and I would like to be a U.S. Senator who is not bought and paid for by the bipartisan Washington lobbying cabal. And that's how we're going to get our nation's problems solved. We don't need to abandon, as the establishment is trying to convince us, we Republicans, that we need to abandon our core values. We can hold fast to our core values of limited government and personal freedom and personal responsibility, and we can build on those values to solve the nation's problems. And these solutions are going to look different than Democrat solutions.
Jim, if you end up going down to D.C., what would you do to help end New Hampshire's addiction to federal money?
Well, I'll give you one example. We send more money down to Washington than we get back. I think New Hampshire gets about 73 cents back on the dollar compared to what we send down. So I'd begin, just as a for example, I would dismantle the Federal Department of Education and block grant that money back to the states and localities. That's a transitional move so that our money going to Washington comes back to us without the sticky fingers of Washington imposing Common Core, et cetera, on us, and imposing and extracting administrative expenses from our money. So that's a start. We need to obey the Constitution. The 10th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution allocates to the federal government certain defined powers, and all other powers are reserved to the states and the people. I think if we begin obeying the 10th Amendment, we will move exactly in the direction you're talking about and proposing. And so we need U.S. senators who actually believe in the Constitution, who will vote according to the Constitution.
Here's a question I like to ask people who run for the U.S. Senate. Would you support a return to U.S. senators being appointed by state legislatures instead of being directly elected? Not that we're ever going to get there, but would you support that?
Yeah, I wouldn't. And the reason that the public vigorously wanted that system changed with an amendment to the U.S. Constitution is because of at the time there was rather intense corruption associated with the choice of U.S. senators. So that the public wanted to have a more direct opportunity to vote for their U.S. senators. So no, I wouldn't support that.
There's a lot of things going on. Obviously, the Obama administration has made a lot of moves that have made it difficult for states to control their own elections as they're supposed to. How would you approach the problem as it stands now, and what do you think we need to change?
Well, we do have a radical administration in the form of the Obama administration, and they're blocking states doing pretty basic stuff, like attempting to enforce voting laws so that people who are legally eligible to vote wind up voting in elections. So we have a problem right here in New Hampshire, for certain. We have people flaunting their ability to vote in multiple states, driving into our state and abusing our same-day voter registration system in order to swing our elections in the swing state. So the federal government has attempted to suppress states through litigation, striking down state laws, attempting simply to have people vote in the various states who are eligible to vote in those states, who actually live in those states.
The Second Amendment seems pretty clear to me. I don't think that you need to ask permission to have a license to carry a firearm, but some states do not recognize reciprocity across state borders. Do you think that is a national issue, or would you continue to leave that up to the states?
I think that is a national issue in the way that maybe it shouldn't be, but it is. We have states, if you have a driver's license in New Hampshire, you can drive in any of the 50 states with that license. And we ought to be able to do the same thing with concealed carry permits and gun rights. Again, the states are very slow to do this. But there may be a role for the federal government in accelerating the process of adhering to the provisions in the Constitution that allow a trade across state boundaries.
You mentioned education block grant and working to basically systematically remove the Department of Education from its current role. What other agencies would you do that to, and where in order?
Yeah, I think I'd go next to the Department of Commerce. Commerce works very, very well in the United States to the extent that Washington stays out of the way. And again, it's the sticky fingers problem. And you have businesses. It distorts the free market when you force companies to go down to Washington to get grants and loans. You distract those companies from focusing on serving their customers with more, better, cheaper products. So any extent to which we can get back to a free market and get government out of the business of picking winners and losers, that's a good thing. And dismantling the Department of Commerce would be a start.
Okay, we only have like about 2 minutes left. What do you think is the most important issue that voters and residents just aren't talking about?
I'm amazed the extent to which voters and politicians are not talking about the debt. We are looking at $1 trillion per year. This is CBO, mid-case, current policy. $1 trillion a year for the next 10 years. And as far as the eye can see, this debt is the single greatest threat to U.S. national security, according to our military leaders. This debt is starving us of current growth and prosperity, and it's robbing us of future prosperity. We have to, as I mentioned, we have to, as Republicans, do what Republicans did in the 1990s when we had backbone in Washington and we weren't all bipartisan capitulation, and we voted no on these budget-busting budgets. We voted no, unlike the incumbent, Kelly Ayotte. And we dragged big spending Republicans and Democrats and the president to the bargaining table. And by gosh, we had 4 years of a balanced budget, and we had the prosperity that comes with that. We have the Federal Reserve Board now enabling this drunk on debt, addicted to debt Congress. They're enabling this debt by forcing interest rates down to as close to zero as possible. And when this ends, and boy, it will end, this is a bubble of immense proportions generated by Congress and the Federal Reserve Board. And when it ends, a day of reckoning will come, and we're going to be paying $1 trillion a year just for debt service. So if we can get enough people in the U.S. Senate and Congress who will exercise the power of the purse, we can deal with this problem before we hit some kind of fiscal calamity.
Okay, last thing. A couple days left before the primary. Where are you going to be this weekend?
My staff is scheduling. It'll be up on our calendar at jimrubens.com. I don't even know where I'm going to be from day to day because my staff does all that, but we will be in as many places as possible to meet folks, to talk with people face to face. That's how I've been doing my campaign thus far, entirely talking face to face with people, and people really admire the fact that I've got backbone, and you can probably hear that here, and I've got imagination, and I'm very, very committed to the core conservative values that form a basis for the Republican Party. And again, the establishment is attempting to persuade Republicans, and I'm working on this very hard. They're attempting to persuade Republicans that we need to abandon all of our core values in order to get elected to the U.S. Senate. And I make the point that Kelly Ayotte, if I lose the primary, there's going to be a three-way general election. There's going to be an independent conservative running. She's gone in the general. And so I make the case, I'm making the case to Republicans, look, if you want a Republican who will vote conservative, vote like a Republican, there is massive tens of millions of dollars of Save the Senate for Republicans money already booked, already in the bank. So it's completely up to Republican primary voters in the state to decide if you want a Republican who will adhere to, fight for, and love the values that we cherish as a party.
All right, Jim, jimrubens.com, jimrubens.com. That's how they find out where you're going to be, correct? And if you want to reach out. All right, thank you so much for taking some time to talk to me.
Thank you, Steve.
All right, you have a great night.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. The 603 Alliance is hosting world-renowned author Trevor Loudon in Nashua for the New Hampshire premiere showing of the new film based on his best-selling book, The Enemies Within. The premiere showing is next Friday, September 16th, 7 p.m. at the Crown Plaza in Nashua. Tickets are only $10 per person. You can reserve a spot in advance and pay at the door, or you can pay online at 603alliance.org. If you would like additional information about the event or Trevor Loudon, please contact event manager Dial Lothrop at 603-864-9287.